So welcome, ladies. This is our latest version of Virtual Girly Book Club. We're so excited to have Teresa Driscoll here. She is the author of our January book, I Am Watching You, which we have all read throughout the month and now gotten together to discuss at our book clubs across the world. It has been a great month. Teresa Driscoll is a former BBC TV news presenter and now an international #1 best-selling author. Her debut psychological suspense, I Am Watching You, hit #1 on Kindle in the UK, USA, and Australia, and sold more than 200,000 copies in its first 5 months alone. It's going to be followed in spring 2018 by The Friend. Teresa's women's fiction is already published in 6 languages. Her debut in this genre, Recipes for Melissa, was auctioned at the Frankfurt Book Fair between 7 German publishers, and her second women's fiction title is Last Kiss Goodnight. During her long career as a journalist, Teresa worked for newspapers, magazines, and television, including 15 years presenting the BBC television program Spotlight. Covering crime for so long, she was deeply moved by the haunting impact on the relatives, the friends, and the witnesses, and it ripples now in how she explores her darker fiction. Teresa lives in glorious Devon with her husband and 2 sons and blogs regularly about her writing life on her website. So it is my great pleasure now to introduce you ladies to Teresa. Teresa, thank you so much for joining us on the Virtual Girly Book Club.
Hello, everyone. From what is a very cold and slightly wintry evening in Devon. It's 10 o'clock here, so it's dark and cold, but lovely to join you. And thank you so much. I mean, I'm so chuffed that the book was selected by the Girly Book Club, and I feel really, really pleased and delighted to be here.
Oh, it's amazing. We really appreciate you taking the time, and we would love to dive into some questions about this book that we've been reading all month long. So where did the idea of the storyline for I Am Watching You come from?
Well, I was traveling up to London on a train and really did get on carrying black plastic bin bags, and my background, as you just said, is journalism. I was a newspaper journalist and a television reporter and a news presenter for the BBC, and journalists are nosy people by nature. And so I kind of listened in to these guys talking, and I realized and was really quite shaken to find out what was in the black plastic bin bags, and that these guys were just out of prison, and nothing particularly untoward happened on that journey. But as a writer, as a journalist, and certainly as someone who was already experimenting and writing a lot of fiction, my author brain was going, hey, what if this happened? What if that happened? And by the time I got to London, this idea was gelling in my brain that this could really be the opening of a story. And I originally wrote it up as a short story, but I realized that it was meant to be a novel. So that's where the very seed of the book came. And then the character of Ella sort of stepped forward. That's how it works with me. It's almost as if the characters introduce themselves to me. And I realized very strongly, very early on, that I wanted this to be a book that shone a light on all the different people affected by a girl going missing, not just a police procedural, not just the story of the one family, but the ripple effect of different people who would be impacted by Anna's disappearance. So the idea started on that train and just grew and grew and grew.
That's really fascinating. Yeah, one of the questions at our Toronto meeting last night between members was wondering if any of the events that happened in the book were inspired by real life events. So it's really interesting to know that the men on the train, that was inspired by a real life event that you yourself, saw, at least the characters in this sense, storyline hopefully different, but yeah.
Absolutely. I never use real people or real life events, obviously in fiction, but I quite often use the emotional landscape of life or just general ideas that come to me in real life. And in the many years that I worked as a journalist, I often saw court cases where people would talk about, when they were witnesses, seeing something just before something bad happened, and they might be called forward by the police or whatever. And I would see the impact on those people, witnesses. And that was the other thing that came to me after that train journey, that I realized I wanted to look at the moral dilemma of people, and when they have found belatedly, with hindsight, that they were perhaps the last person to see someone before something bad happened. And so that again became a new idea that I wanted to explore in this book, the issue of whether Ella was in any way culpable because she didn't intervene. And I felt that would be an important and interesting thing to examine.
Yeah, so one of the questions we received from Jenny was why you chose to tell the story from Ella's perspective in the first person and the other characters in third person.
Again, I often find when I'm writing that the characters come to me. I mean, I know I invent them. I mean, I know deep down I make up all the stories and I invent all the characters, but it doesn't actually feel like that. Often when I'm giving talks, I quote the writer Elizabeth Bowden, who said that characters in our novels aren't created by authors. They pre-exist and we just have to find them. And I was so relieved to read that, because I always feel I sound a bit bonkers when I describe my writing process. But it really does feel as if the characters come to me and then I listen to them as I'm writing. And the reason I chose to give Ella a first person voice is she came to me really loud. she was right there on my shoulder as I started writing that first version, the short story. And so it was very intimate listening to her and getting a handle on her and who she was. And I realized that it needed to be first person because it was very close up and very personal. And the other characters, it just felt right to put them forward in the third person, because they stepped back a little bit. And I thought, oh yes, Ella's the one who's right on my shoulder as I write. So that's why I decided to make her first person.
Great. Yeah. And there were a lot of characters in this book. That was a topic of discussion last night. What was your reasoning to include as many characters as you did, and their role and their connection to this crime and this mystery?
Well, as I say, I got this idea quite early on that I wanted to look at the ripples, like throwing a pebble in the pool and watching all the ripples go out, rather than just following the kind of the mystery of who done it, what happened to Anna, and just her family's story. So early on, that was definitely what I wanted to do. But I did really worry about having a number of different viewpoints. I mean, I have 4 viewpoints for this book. And early on, I actually panicked about that, because it can be a mistake to have too many viewpoints. It can make the novel feel a little bit uncontrollable. I think sometimes for readers that can be a mistake. So I wasn't super confident from the beginning that I was doing the right thing. But as the writing progressed, I felt that this was going to help the pace of the book, to have these 4 different voices and to go between them. And honestly, as I was writing, it felt as if I was turning from one to the other and going, oh, right, you now, what next? And I felt very excited about the writing process, having them crowd around me and tell this story. But when I got to the end, I remember saying to my husband, I'm not 100% sure the readers are going to like this, that it's going to work, but it's just the way I had to do this particular book. And I've been so relieved that the feedback's been great and people have enjoyed that. I know it's not for everyone, multi-viewpoint, but for this particular book, it felt right, and it seems to have worked off in terms of the pace.
In retrospect, are there any character viewpoints you wish you had included?
I don't think so. I mean, at the end of the book, and I know we're not going to do spoilers, I kind of moved the camera lens a little bit, which I felt was essential for readers to fully understand the whole story. But no, I was really quite comfortable with the way I did it. It was interesting because I learned a lot during the editing process of this book. This is actually the first psychological suspense that I've published, but as you said, it's the 3rd title I've published. So I've been through the editing process several times before. And I think I've learned to listen to my editors, and they always bring great things to the books, and the books are always better through the input of editorial discussions. But I have learned also to trust my gut. And in actual fact, my editors had said they weren't sure whether they wanted me to take one voice out of the book And I'm not going to tell you which one it was. And I panicked. I went, I can't do that. This can't happen. It won't be my book if I take that voice out. And they said, give it a try, Teresa. So during one round of editing, I took the voice out and I read the book that night until very late, early hours. And I went to bed and cried. I was so distraught because it just didn't feel right without this voice. And I got straight on to my editor the next morning. I said, I have sent it to you without this voice, but it really doesn't feel right. And she went, oh, no, Teresa, we don't want you to feel distressed about it. And so I spent the next day putting it all back in again. So again, I wasn't sure if I got it right, but I knew in my heart that I had to be true to my gut and my instincts. So now I feel really comfortable with all the voices that I did leave in, but it did go through the mill a bit.
Did the picture feel almost incomplete to remove that character and that voice and that other, point of view from it?
It did, and it was worse than that. I felt that the menace of the book, I felt the haunting nature of the book, which is what I wanted to achieve, a slightly haunting element. I particularly wanted Anna's absence from the book to be a haunting feel throughout the book. Everyone else was talking about her, but of course it was her being missing that's the central thing. And yeah, I felt quite distressed at taking that voice out. And so it was a huge relief to me when it went back in before the book was published. And that's why I thought, well, readers will have to make of it what they will. And I really hope they enjoy it. But I've been true to what I felt was the right thing for the book. And in the end, that was important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So for the writing process for this one, without any spoilers, did you know the outcome right from the start and sort of write backwards and develop characters around that? Or did the ending come to you a little bit later on once you had already started writing?
Oh no, I knew how the book was going to end. And in fact, I mean, I don't think we're giving spoilers away if I mention that the final scene, which involves flowers, which all of you, it was really important to me. And I had that in my head while I was writing the book. It was a really strong scene that I knew was key and very, very important. So I had a rough plan of the book, including the ending. But I'm not somebody who plans every scene in a book when I write. I have just rough brushstrokes through the plot, and the characters lead me. I told you there's this slight madness where they convince me they really are real people, and I listen to them. So I follow them a little bit of sometimes they get a bit off piste, and I have to try and control them and call them back. But yes, I knew the shape of the book. I knew the ending. But there were some surprises along the way as I was writing. But it was a real pleasure to write this book. I really enjoyed writing it. I wrote it very fast. The characters were very strong, and yeah, it was really energizing.
Amazing. Yeah, so I have a question from one of our members named Nicole. I'm going to edit it slightly as there is a bit of a spoiler in the question. So with regards to the ending and Anna, Nicole says she's curious to know if it's harder to write a mystery novel if you know at the start how it will ultimately end. How do you ensure that your reader is kept guessing without inadvertently giving it away?
Hello, Nicole. It's a good question. I think the truth is it's something that's very difficult to evaluate as a writer, because of course, when you know the outcome yourself, it's hard to judge a book when you're editing and going over it and checking as to whether you have left some crumbs and clues and guidance for the reader, but not too many. It's quite hard to evaluate. And I think that's why having an editor is such a helpful thing. And with this particular book, one of my big concerns is I wanted the outcome of the book to be absolutely credible, and that for people to go, oh yes, but I didn't want people to guess. And so I was walking this really fine line between it being utterly credible but not guessable. I wasn't writing something where I wanted people to be able to put the puzzle together before, because I wanted the surprise. I wanted some shock, as it were, as the book progressed. So I did find it quite difficult to evaluate whether I had left too big a clues or not enough. And that's why it was helpful to get new readers to give me some feedback and to talk extensively with the editor. But I think that I would be writing notes in the margins all the time when I was rereading the book going, oh, no, too heavy with this, take some bits out. So it's a fine line to walk, but it's something that you learn with practice, I think.
Amazing. Yeah, that is something I overheard a lot last night at our meeting, was that nobody had guessed the ending. You know, the whole time you're trying to figure out who it could be, but nobody had it. So it was a really surprising ending, which pleased a lot of people, I think, and myself personally. I'm a little bit curious about your writing process with the different viewpoints. Did you write it completely in chronological order as it is in the book, or did you write each character's sections and meld them together afterwards?
Chronological.
Mm-hmm.
I have heard other authors say that when they have different viewpoints, they write one whole viewpoint and then they weave them together. But no, I write chronologically. And in fact, I now write in what I call forward gear. I took Stephen King's advice a number of years ago, and he's the great master, isn't he? But he's fantastic, particularly with creative writing tips. And in fact, when I wrote my first book, was published, called Recipes for Melissa, it was after reading his advice. I used to write and edit as I went along. I would write in the morning, edit in the afternoon, and we tend to be quite self-critical authors, and so you tend to experience a lot of angst when you're writing, and you know, if you're going to edit as you go along, keep changing things. And Stephen King said, don't do that, just write the book. And it was marvelous. It was like there's a light going on in my writing life. It's like, stop editing, Teresa, criticizing yourself, just write the book. And so that's what I did with Recipes for Melissa, and that's when my writing career took off, when we had all those auctions, and the German publishers were also marvelous. It was fantastic. And I realized with this book, to keep the energy and the excitement and the passion for the book, I write it from beginning, go all the way through, and worrying about the editing later. So yeah, absolutely, from chapter 1 through, and then worry later.
All right. Okay. Thank you. That helps to know. Yeah, I'm always curious about the process for different authors, so it's really nice to have some insight into yours. And I'm curious about going from women's fiction, your first 2 titles were women's fiction, to now 2, you've got a new one coming out, we'll talk about that shortly, to moving over to psychological suspense. Is the writing process similar for you between both genres?
It is very similar. And in fact, some people have said to me, how is it you're writing in 2 genres? And I think there used to be an old school thinking that it wasn't a good idea to change genres, and that maybe readers wouldn't like that, or maybe you should use a different name. But the truth is, when I was a journalist, I was always writing different kinds of stories. Sometimes I'd be writing, features, human interest stories, and sometimes I'd be covering crime. And the thing that I really became fascinated in as a journalist was bad things happening to good people, and ordinary lives being changed by extraordinary events. And I found as a journalist that happened it could either happen with natural events, flood, disease, an accident, or it can happen with crime affecting ordinary people. So I didn't find it strange when I first started writing fiction to do 2 different kinds of stories. And you'll find across my women's fiction and my psychological suspense, we're talking about very ordinary people that bombs go off in their lives, literally, as in either a natural disaster or some criminal impact on their lives. So the process for me is the same, and I don't see it so very different. They're obviously different genres. I respect that, but I don't find it strange to write 2 kinds of books. When I first started out and I was trying to get agents, they would be going, whoa, you're going to write 2 kinds of genres. Is this a good idea? And I didn't mind which got the book deal first. It just happened to be the women's fiction. But I'm very lucky that I have a fabulous agent now who just, when I put up the idea of I Am Watching You, just said, oh, wow, you have to write this. It's fine to do a different genre. And she gets it completely. And so, yes, I use the same process. And I don't personally, I find it strange to do 2 genres at all.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit more about your transition from women's fiction to psychological suspense, and more specifically, the two-book deal with Amazon's publishing imprint, Thomas and Mercer, which led to I Am Watching You and your next upcoming release?
Okay, well, the first two women fictions book I wrote, one came out one year, one the following year, and that went extremely well. They were very well received. I was so thrilled. They were translated into 6 languages. And the obvious thing would be to write a third women's fiction book to the same audience. But as I've explained to you, I'd already been experimenting, in the early days of writing fiction, women's fiction type and psychological suspense. And so I said to my agent, I've got these 2 ideas. One's women's fiction and one is for I Am Watching You. And I told her I'd written the beginning and I was really desperate to write it. And she liked both ideas. And she said, well, you must go with your gut and see what you think you should do. And I made the big mistake of deciding I'd write them both in the same year, very, very quickly. So I wrote the bones of the women's fiction one, and then I moved on to writing I Am Watching You. And I just felt so much stronger connection with the story, and the energy was so strong in writing it. And my agent loved it. So she said to me, I think we should put this one out. And she had a great reaction immediately, I'm pleased to say. And so Thomas and Mercer were just very keen to sign me for 2 books. I was blown away by that and delighted, particularly as I was a bit nervous. It was this new genre. And I mean, you always write the best book you can write. I mean, you never know how it's going to be received. I didn't know this book was going to take off. I hoped it would do well. My women's fiction titles hovered just outside the bestseller list, and I thought it would be really great if we could get on the top 100. That was my big dream. And within a few days, it was #1. And my husband I remember him coming up the stairs because I was working on the next book and saying, Teresa, your book is #1. And I was going, no, it must be a mistake. And I went on my computer and I really could not believe it. I didn't foresee that at all. I didn't think by switching genres or that this book, I was worried there were too many voices in it, like we've discussed. And it was insane and wonderful. I was just so humbled and amazed about that transition. So of course, my delighted publisher came back and said, we'd like 2 more books. Will consider having another deal? So I've signed to write yet 2 more psychological suspense. But I'd be as happy to return to writing women's fiction. I just love writing both. It's just this has taken off in the most spectacular way, and I feel so lucky and so delighted that obviously I'm going to go forward and write some more psychological suspense for Thomas and Mercer now.
That's amazing. Well, we're very excited for your next release called The Friend, which is coming out in March this year, correct?
Right, yes.
Awesome.
And this is very much a story. Again, it came to me quite strong, the concept and the idea. Who do you trust with your child? This was the question that was sort of ringing in my ear when I was coming up with the idea for this story. Who do you make the call when you should trust your child to? And it tells the story of Sophie who's on a train again. We have another train. I didn't even realize that when I came up with the idea, but there we are. And she's racing home from Devon, having just found out that her child has been hurt in an accident, but it's all a mystery and she can't get the right information. She doesn't know exactly what's happened. And so she is reliving and going back over the last 6 months to really figure out whether she's made a bad move here and a bad judgment. And what I wanted to capture in this book is, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, when you really click with someone. You meet someone and you really click with them. And it's as if you've known them ages and you feel really at ease with them really, really quickly. And I wanted to capture that relationship in this book and ask the question, if that happens and when that happens, should you trust that? Should you go with that? Should you trust your gut? And so that's what I'm examining in this book. And again, a lot of fun to write. I've really enjoyed writing it. So I really hope people are going to like it.
That's great. So how will you be spending the rest of this year? Are you going to do some promotion for the new book? Are you writing on follow-ups here? What's this year looking like for you?
This year is delightfully busy. The Friend is totally finished, as in all the editing and all of that. So there's obviously, I'm going to be doing PR and chats and talks, and I'm going to the Harrogate Crime Festival in the summer, which is a fabulous crime festival in beautiful, beautiful Harrogate. I went last year and I felt like an utter fraud because I'm Watching wasn't even out. And I was like this little new girl going, "Hi, I'm Teresa. I've got a new book coming out." You know, so I felt really like the girl with the L plates on, the new girl in class. But it's a fantastic festival. Everyone was really warm, all the other crime writers. I'm going back there this year to obviously talk about I'm Watching and The Friend. So there'll be quite a lot of promotional work to do for The Friend. But I'm already working hard on the next book. And in fact, I've got a deadline in just 2 weeks to hand the one after that in, first draft.
Wow.
So it's like off the typewriter. I'm working away really hard on that. And as soon as I hand that one in, the end of this year, I'll be starting to brainstorm and start the very first draft of the book after that. So it's a rolling road.
Wow.
You know. It just keeps going.
That sounds like a lot on the go. Yeah, you're going to be very busy.
I am, but you know, I just feel so lucky and so grateful because I mean, I always tell people, as I say, that I took the scenic route to getting published. Although I was very lucky and I've always earned my living from writing as a journalist, it took me 10 years before I got my first book deal from when I first started experimenting with fiction. So I had a lot of rejection and I had a steep learning curve and a lot of highs and lows during that period. So I feel so lucky to be here now that, you know, I can't complain about being busy.
And I'm curious, how was the, transition and the change from being a journalist to now being a full-time author, keeping very busy with that, obviously?
Well, the day is the same. I'm writing. I'm just, fibbing and making it up now, which is a totally ball game. I love the blank page. I love the fact that it's down to me now what I write. But one thing, of course, I learned from journalism is the discipline of writing every day, whether you feel like it or not. I mean, you can't tell your news editor, "Hey, the muse isn't there, not in the mood today." You just have to get the words on the page. So I'm very disciplined through all those years of being a journalist. I'm very used to having deadlines. I'm very used to people wanting it yesterday. So that was a very good preparation for life as an author. I do love now that I have my own agenda, that I can do anything that I want to do. In fact, a lot of people have asked me about Ella being a florist in the book and saying, because I have to do a lot of research now for my own books, and some people, I was very flattered, said, "Have you been a florist? Do you know about floristry?" I watch YouTube videos, wall to wall. I know nothing about floristry before, but I really wanted, because I had that final scene idea, no spoilers, but I wanted Ella to be a florist. And I thought, well, how am I going to do this? So I just watched, as I say, a lot of YouTubes from florists and floral designers, and it seems I got away with it, so I'm delighted.
That seems like kind of fun research. You just get to YouTube watching florist videos all day.
It's a tough life, but someone has to do it.
That's right. That's right. Well, we appreciate that you do. I want to turn it over at this time to some questions from our members. We've got some that were asked in person last night, some that we received by email and by our social media channels. So in no particular order at all, I'm going to kick it off with a question we received. How many unpublished and half-finished books do you have?
4 unpublished. And in fact, when I say unpublished, though, I wrote 4 novels before, and a lot of them came very close to getting publishing deals. This was before my first published novel, Recipes for Melissa. But I did salvage bits of them because although I was learning my craft and I was making mistakes in those early days, some of the ideas and characters were really good. And as I say, a couple of them were nearly picked up by major publishers. So since I've had publishing deals, I've gone back and taken bits or ideas in order to write new books. So I haven't wasted, I don't think anything's wasted when you're a writer. You're learning things, you're developing your craft. But yeah, I mean, I often, when I'm going to giving talks and to creative writing groups, for instance, and try and encourage people to say, keep going, I always say nothing is wasted. You're always learning, you're always always polishing and getting better. So, but yeah, the answer is 4 unpublished. I remember I used to joke at dinner parties. I wrote a quarter of a million words unpaid before I got the first deal. So yeah, I certainly served the apprenticeship.
I would say so, yes. We received another question. Actually, I heard murmurs about this last night too, so quite curious. Is it true that Matthew, the private investigator, will be the main character in an upcoming book?
Okay. So the thing is, I had absolutely no plans, and I have no plans to write series. All my books are standalone, and they are all standalone. So the next book, The Friend, you don't have to read I'm Watching You. You could read it on its own. But I got really fond of Matthew Hill when I was writing him in this book. And I don't know, he was just really such fun to work with and to write. And so when I was writing The Friend, he kind of suddenly just appeared, you know, and that I looked across and I thought, okay, so you're in this one too. So the Matthew Hill comes back in The Friend. He has a role. It's not, you know, the biggest role, and I don't think, you know, as I say, it's not a series. It's not his series, but he put his hand up when I was writing, and I agreed to let him back in the story. So we do meet Matthew again in The Friend, and I'm delighted because, as I say, he's great fun to write, and we meet him a little bit later in the next book. So yeah, he's back.
That's very, very exciting. That is exciting. I know some of our members from Toronto will be excited to hear that because they felt that, you know, he was their favorite character. So I have another question about Matthew again. In regards to I Am Watching You. Why did you feel it was important to include a character that wasn't quite so personally connected to the story of Anna?
Okay, well, I knew that I didn't want to write police procedural. There are great authors doing police procedurals, and, you know, there are lots of them, and I didn't want to kind of get into that territory. I didn't feel that was my forte. But I did want to, you know, have these different lenses to tell the story. And so the issue of the investigation needed to be there because, of course, I knew, you know, if a teenager goes missing like Anna, the police investigation would be significant in the story. But I wanted it to be noises off. So the idea came to me of using Matthew as a private investigator brought in by someone. So he wasn't central to the investigation. It wouldn't be procedural as such, but he would allow us to shine a light slightly from the side of the stage. So that's why I got the idea to introduce Matthew. And then I just got so fond of him. His role sort of grew. And as I told you, I write the story from the beginning and it's like, oh, it's you again, Matthew. Okay, come on then, step forward. Tell us what you've got to do now. So his role grew as I wrote the book because I felt his presence was important. And I also suddenly realized as I was writing the book that he would allow me to explore one of the themes of guilt because with his different background and his different take on the story. So he became a very useful new voice and device in the story.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. We have another question here about characters from Paige. At any point during this book, did you have difficulties writing about certain aspects or situations between the characters? Was this from your imagination, or did you do some research in order to develop the characters, specifically Henry, Tim, Lily, and Sarah?
Well, I deal with quite a lot of difficult themes in this book, as you all know. And so there was some really difficult stuff to write. I covered a lot of difficult stuff when I was a journalist. So all of the territories and all of the books, you know, I've seen, as I say, I've walked in some dark shadows as a journalist and covered difficult stuff. But I've always felt that we shouldn't shy away from difficult themes as writers, because I think there's important stuff to be examined in literature. And I think that providing you do it with great sensitivity and you're true to yourself as a writer in digging deep and examining difficult emotional landscape, then I feel it's very important. So I found it very hard writing the scenes involving Sarah, which you'll all understand. I know we're not doing spoilers, but I have interviewed people who have lived and walked in Sarah's shoes, not her story, because I would never use a real story, but that landscape. And very often I found in my life as a journalist, when dealing with that difficult territory, they were too afraid to come forward. The pin was in the grenade. And so I felt I wanted to examine that, to try to make a connection with an important subject. I hope I did it well. I hope I did it sensitively. You can only do your best. But I found that very hard to write. But I felt it was important to write for this story. And I also found it very hard to write the final scenes. Again, I find it quite hard reading them back sometimes. I thought, sometimes you think, my goodness, I put my readers through it. But again, it's about wanting the emotional landscape to have resonance, so that it isn't true, but it feels true to life. It feels true to emotional experiences that people have had. And I hope that's what I've achieved. That's certainly what I was setting out to achieve.
Yeah, very great. And I do want to stick on Sarah as a character. We have a question here from Susan. I will edit it slightly to not spoil what surrounds Sarah's storyline. But the story between Sarah and her father is quite disturbing. So Susan wants to know, were you intentionally making a statement about the importance of speaking up? Similarly to the Me Too movement and other relevant things happening in our current climate and in current events today.
I wrote this book long before, of course, we had this wave of people being involved with that. So no, it wasn't in any way connected like that. It wasn't a particular statement. But I just, of course, as a journalist, covered so much difficult territory where there were women who were in dark places, who didn't feel they had anywhere to turn and didn't feel that their emotional experience would be understood. And I sometimes feel as a writer, it's not that I'm saying, it's not for me to say whether people should speak up or not. I think that's something that they must make their own decisions about. But I think that in literature, you can reach out and make it known that their pain and their feelings and their experience are understood and heard. So even by putting Sarah in the book, you are reaching out to people who've had difficult experiences across all sorts of different areas of life, and saying that emotional pain is shared across by so many different people in so many different ways, that connection is important. So I wasn't seeking to make a statement about what a person should do. I suppose I'm just trying to put into my books the difficult areas of life that we must all walk through. And so you're putting out that feeling that people aren't alone when they suffer difficult things. And I hope, if that's helpful, then good. I'm not saying that my books are setting out to be helpful to people, but if they connect with people, and if people feel an emotional connection to characters, then I would be pleased about that. I would feel that that's a compliment.
Great, thank you. We had a question last night that came up at our meeting. What made you decide to include the hostage scenario in the storyline outside of the UK?
It was Matthew. I was sitting at my desk just typing away, and Matthew goes, "Hey, you know what's going on now?" And I'm going, "Really? Is that what's going on? Really?" And I told you, it sounds like a madness, and they'll come and lock me up and take me away if I say too much, but it does. Maybe it's because I was a reporter. Maybe it's because I write in that slight reportage way, but the ideas come to me and they play out in my head, and it's if I watch them and then write them down. That just came to me. I didn't have that planned when I started the book, and it just felt really important to me that it should be there. And Matthew seemed to think it would be abroad, and that's how it was going to play out. And then as I was writing it, it felt right. And I think in the context of the book, it also feels right, because otherwise you're going to be thinking, well, hey, why weren't they noticed? Why weren't people onto what was going on? So blame Matthew Hill. When anything else goes wrong, it's my new mantra. Blame Matthew Hill. It's not my fault. It's Matthew.
He can be a scapegoat. We're okay with that.
He can.
So we have a question here from Katie, who's on our chat live right now. Hopefully I will not spoil anything by asking this here. The magnifying glass.
Yes.
Was it a mistake leaving it behind? What did the guilty person want Ella to feel or realize when seeing it? Was he trying to place the blame on Luke?
The magnifying glass was intended just to really heighten the pressure, to really escalate things, and for Ella, because poor Ella's going through so much, and her mind is like a washing machine, isn't it? There's all these things tumbling around, and so I just felt I needed to put one more thing in there to ramp up the suspense. And so I didn't have a view that it was left deliberately, but that it was yet another thing she couldn't cope with. I wanted one more thing that she couldn't cope with. Sorry, readers, but I just felt you needed one more thing to drive you nuts. So it was the magnifying glass, and so I felt it had its little place, and so that's why that went in there. Sorry.
That's great. Something that we've chatted about a lot, and this has been one of our global discussion questions that we've put out on our social channels and on our blog as well, and got women to weigh in, was about Ella's situation. And if you were in that situation, you were seeing what Ella was seeing, would you intervene or would you leave it be? And a lot of the response that we saw was leave it be. And so some of the women last night, at least personally speaking from the meeting I was at, were a little distraught. Like, why did Ella receive so much blame for, potentially something she could have done nothing about regardless, even if she had have stepped in, may not have changed the outcome? What was your purpose in Ella receiving so much blame and those, the nasty messages she received afterwards from people in her community and outside of it?
Yes, I wanted to do a moral dilemma story. I wanted to shine a light on that question, should you butt in or butt out when something's going on? That was an idea I really wanted to explore. But I don't think I ever meant to suggest that Ella should have intervened. I just wanted people to think about whether or not she should have, and obviously people have been talking about it. And I wanted Ella to examine afterwards whether or not she should have intervened. So it was something I just wanted to explore rather than say there was a right or a wrong response to it. So I fully expected most readers to say, oh no, she couldn't have been expected to intervene, but that she would have thought about it. I saw a lot of court cases, I say, when I was a journalist, when afterwards a witness would realize that something they thought they felt uncomfortable about went wrong. With hindsight, they think hindsight's not a wonderful thing. Hindsight's a cruel thing, because it makes you think, oh, maybe I should have done something. But of course, that's only because you know afterwards what happened. At the time, you couldn't know. So I'd seen that same time. I wanted to explore that. And I've also seen very unjust judgment with trolls on social media. You get people responding, don't you, these days very unfairly. And if you look at media reports and you read below the lines, there's all sorts of wild things can be said about things that seem completely unreasonable. So I wanted to look at that too. So I needed Ella to go through that. Should I, shouldn't I, should I? Oh, no, I won't, because I think that's what most people would probably think. Oh, no, you shouldn't. And then belatedly think, oh, should I? So that it was really that sort of, as I say, with hindsight and the benefit of hindsight, looking back on the issue. But I'm not surprised that most people would think, oh, no, she couldn't have been expected to. But there have been quite a lot of high profile cases, I'm sure you're aware, where people have asked afterwards, have thought, I wish I had, but not that society judged or felt that they should have, but that it was a tricky thing to think about. I wouldn't want to be in those shoes myself.
Agreed. Yeah, I could imagine it would be a very difficult position to be in. And then, harboring sort of guilt over that and over not acting upon that little bit in your gut that says, should I do this? Should I do something about this or not? That's tough to cope with after the fact, especially in the case of this book and how things turned out for Anna and with her disappearance, which she learned about, the next day. So,
yes,
yeah.
And I deliberately gave Ella a slightly increased sense of her conscience and she was a little bit perhaps overzealous in her guilt. And I deliberately did that because some people do have that personality. And so I had other voices saying to her in the book, oh, there's no, you can't blame yourself, all the things that most people would be saying. But I wanted to, it would be horrible to be in that situation, wouldn't it? As I was writing, and I did feel for her, I thought it would be awful to have that little kernel of doubt as to whether you should have done something. And really, that's what I was examining. And I really hoped people would talk about it, and they have. So that's a good thing, I think, to get people talking.
Exactly, yeah. Well, it's done what you've sought out for it to do. A little note here from Nicole. She is from our book club chapter in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. And she noted that in their club, they found there's a cultural difference between Canada and Britain in terms of how likely someone would be to intervene. They have a member in their group who is actually from England, and she said that a lot of people there on the train intervene a lot more in situations than we do on, our buses and trains here in Canada. And I know in Toronto, even on our public transit system, oftentimes if something is happening, a lot of people just put their heads down and, do not engage in a way. So I think it was interesting to read and see that sort of cultural difference come through in your writing, which was...
Oh, I find it so interesting to hear that, of course, because I've not lived in Canada. But when I was writing the book, I was thinking different personalities respond in different ways, don't they? I think you might respond differently also in a city to a rural area, depending on, the group of people that were there, how threatening the situation might seem. The police so often say, don't intervene if there's someone who could be dangerous. That's the advice we're quite often given. I think it depends whether you're a parent and there's a child involved. There are so many different things to be considered. But I do find that particularly interesting to think that there would be a cultural difference as well from country to country. So even more things to talk and think about. So thank you for that. I've taken something from that. It's really interesting.
Amazing. Well, thank you, ladies, who brought that forward, Nicole, and your group. We have a question from Colleen. She was saying that their group felt character development was one of the best parts of this book. And her question to follow up is, do you have any interest in writing a whodunit to really let your strong, multi-dimensional characters shine?
Oh, no, that's an interesting one. I don't know is the answer to that, but it makes me so happy when readers say they love the characters and the character development, because to me, my absolute favorite fiction is character-led. I mean, I love so many writers who are brilliant at creating characters, and it's always been my goal to make the characters the most important thing in the story, that they're credible. I mean, as I say, I might sound mad, don't I? But they feel real to me, and I want them to feel real to the readers. So the character development is absolutely key to me. I think there are so many people doing absolutely brilliant whodunits. I want to carry on writing psychological thrillers because I love playing with the emotions. I love playing with the characters, and I think that genre, that subgenre, lends itself to that because you're doing mystery, but you can do it from different angles. Standard whodunit, I'm not sure really is the answer. I'm not sure, but I'm so enjoying trying different things that I would never say never to anything.
All right. Do you have any advice to any of our writers out there? I know a good number of our book club members are also writers themselves. Do you have any advice to new, young, starting out, seasoned writers?
Okay, the thing that I would is write what you feel passionately about. Don't go chasing trends, because by the time you finished a book, the trend will have gone. Write what you believe in and what you feel excited about. And the other thing I'd share is, again, that advice that I picked up rather late in the game from Stephen King, which is, write in forward gear. Edit later, polish the story, write while the buzz is there, when you're excited about your project. So get the first draft written. I would say don't tell too many people about it, because if someone even raises their eyebrow, it can throw you off and lose confidence in your project. So I say keep it close. And then just write as much as you possibly can. It's like, I'm saying it took me a long time, longer than most, to get a publishing deal. But it's like a gymnast who's destined to be in the Olympics. They still have to train. So write every opportunity that you can. Don't be put off by rejection. It's not a full stop. It's just turn the page and move forward. Rejection is part of the journey, really. Writing every day means you're going to get better and better and better. And just believe in yourself. Please believe in yourself and enjoy it.
That's amazing. That's wonderful advice. Thank you for sharing that with us.
My pleasure. I mean, as I say, I remember when I was trying to get published and thinking, when will it happen? When will this happen for me? And there were some days which were really difficult, when I nearly got a book deal, and then it would be no. And I think it's just so important to encourage other people to keep going, because I was really determined, and thank goodness I did keep going. But I would hate for someone to stop and be discouraged and to think it's not going to happen, because you never know what's around the corner and when it's going to happen. And I just say it's going to be your turn. So just keep going.
That's amazing. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you for taking the time to chat with us tonight. We have loved this month spending reading your book. We are super excited for The Friend, which is coming out in 2 short months. So we're very excited to read that, and hopefully that will be an upcoming Girly Book Club pick as well. If not, I'm sure our readers are going to pick it up anyways, now that we are all hooked on your writing from I Am Watching You. So thank you so much for taking the time. It has been so lovely chatting with you and learning more about the book, your writing process, the characters. It has been really great chatting with you.
It's been a joy. Thank you all. I'm chuffed. I've loved it.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I hope you have a fantastic evening, and we'll chat with you sometime soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.